Melissa Cooper was 27 years old when she vanished. It was October 3rd, 1999, a Sunday. The sun had begun its slow descent over the Tennessee foothills, casting a golden light over the stretch of Interstate 24. Melissa had just wrapped up a weekend visiting her sister in Chattanooga. She was driving back to Nashville, where her husband, Daniel, was waiting with dinner and a surprise. Their wedding album had finally arrived. They had only been married for 6 weeks. Melissa was the kind of woman people remembered, not for anything flashy, but for her warmth. Her colleagues at the Animal Rescue Center described her as the calm during a storm. Her sister said she laughed easily, and Daniel, her husband, once told a reporter, "She had this way of looking at you that made you believe everything would be okay." At 6:14 p.m., Melissa pulled into a roadside gas station near Monteagle. Surveillance footage later showed her stepping out of her blue Toyota Corolla, stretching briefly, then heading inside the store. She purchased a bottle of water and a pack of gum. The clerk, an older man named Royce, would later recall she was polite, smiled, and asked if they had a restroom. They didn't. Melissa returned to her car. The video shows her opening the driver's side door, and then nothing. When Daniel called her at 7:30 p.m. and she didn't answer, he wasn't worried at first. Maybe she was driving through one of those dead zones in the mountains. Maybe she was just focused on the road. But by 9:00 p.m., with no response, worry started to claw at him. He called her sister. She hadn't heard anything. He called again and again. By midnight, Daniel filed a missing persons report. The scene police found the next morning was eerie. Melissa's car was still at the gas station, parked neatly, the driver's door slightly ajar, keys still in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat, zipped shut. Nothing inside was missing. Not her wallet, not her ID, not the envelope containing the check from her sister. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no broken glass, no skid marks, no witnesses, just absence. The clerk hadn't noticed anything strange that night. The station closed at 9:30. He left before Melissa disappeared. There were no security cameras facing the parking lot, only the one inside the store. Authorities later estimated she vanished within a 10-minute window after the footage stopped. Search parties combed the nearby woods. Police dogs traced her scent to the edge of a tree line, and then lost it completely. No car seen leaving, no scream reported, no one came forward. Melissa Cooper had vanished as if the air had swallowed her. In the weeks that followed, Daniel put his life on pause. He quit his job and printed thousands of missing posters. He drove for hours every day, checking rest stops, truck stations, small motels. He met with psychics out of desperation. He slept on the floor next to their landline just in case she called. He never stopped wearing his wedding ring. When the first anniversary came and went, most people quietly assumed the worst, but Daniel didn't. "I could feel her somewhere," he once told a local news anchor. "It sounds crazy, but I just knew she hadn't left me. Something happened, but I don't know what." For years, the case remained cold. No suspects, no motive, no body. It would stay that way, untouched, unresolved, silent, until exactly 20 years later. September 27th, 2019. A traveling salesman named Eric Dorsey was driving through Tennessee on his way to Atlanta. He pulled into a rest stop for a bottle of soda from an outdoor vending machine. He popped in $1, punched the code, and bent down to check the coin return when something unexpected caught his eye. There, wedged in the shallow plastic slot, was a ring, a delicate gold band, a small but clear diamond, and engraved inside in tiny script, MC 82299. Eric, confused, turned the ring over in his fingers. Something about it felt important. He turned it in to the station clerk, who, unlike Royce in 1999, immediately felt uneasy. The initials, the date. It tugged at something buried in his memory. 2 days later, a local police officer recognized the initials and date combination as the same ones reported in the missing persons case of Melissa Cooper. The ring was shown to Daniel, who identified it instantly. "This was her wedding ring," he said, his voice barely audible. "But this machine," the officer added, "wasn't even here in 1999. It was installed in 2014, and there's no sign it was ever tampered with." The discovery of Melissa Cooper's wedding ring in a vending machine coin return slot set off a chain of events that no one, least of all Daniel, could have prepared for. The police had been cautious at first, unsure of what to make of the bizarre turn of events. How could a piece of personal property, one that had been presumed lost along with its owner 20 years ago, simply show up in a machine installed years after her disappearance? The ring wasn't just any ring either. It was a symbol of a love cut short, a loss that had left its mark on an entire community. And now its return was like an echo from the past, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Daniel was immediately contacted after the ring was found. His mind reeled. He'd spent 20 years holding on to the memory of his wife, refusing to believe she had simply vanished. Her family, his family, and the police had all moved on, but he had kept the faith. He didn't know what to expect when they called him, but the shock of seeing her ring again so unexpectedly felt like the world was shifting beneath him. He met the officer at the local police station, the same one where he had filed the missing persons report 2 decades ago. He took the ring from the officer's hands and held it like something fragile, like something he had lost but never wanted to let go of. It was real. It was Melissa's. He stared at the engraving inside. MC 82299. The officer, a woman named Detective Sarah Grant, noticed the way Daniel's hands trembled. "Mr. Cooper," she began gently, "I know this must be overwhelming, but I need to ask you a few questions. Can you think of any reason, any possibility at all, that someone would have your wife's ring all these years?" Daniel shook his head, still in disbelief. He wanted to believe this was the key to everything, that somehow it was the first clue in finding Melissa, but the doubts were starting to creep in. "I don't understand. The machine wasn't even here when she disappeared. How did the ring end up there?" Grant nodded. "That's what we need to figure out. For now, we have to start with what we know. We'll do a full forensic examination of the ring, but in the meantime, Mr. Cooper, I need you to think back. Did Melissa mention anything strange before she disappeared? Any sign that something was off?" Daniel closed his eyes. He tried to remember those final days, the hours before she vanished. It had been such a normal weekend, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She had talked about the trip to Chattanooga, how she was looking forward to seeing her sister, and then heading home to him. He couldn't think of anything. "I don't know," Daniel murmured, the weight of 2 decades of unanswered questions pressing on his chest. "She was excited to come home. It was supposed to be a normal weekend. She didn't say anything about being afraid. Nothing." Grant scribbled something on her notepad. "All right. For now, we'll take the ring to our forensics team. But Mr. Cooper, we need to consider all possibilities. That ring didn't just appear here by chance. Someone put it there." The next several days were filled with intense investigation. The vending machine, now part of the case file, was analyzed for any signs of tampering. The police discovered that the machine's inner mechanisms hadn't been touched. The slot where the ring was found was undisturbed, no fingerprints, no foreign residue. It was as if the ring had always been there. Daniel could barely sleep, consumed by thoughts of what this new development could mean. Was Melissa still alive? Had she been close by all these years, somewhere in plain sight? Or was this just another clue leading him down a rabbit hole of false hope? The breakthrough. Modern breakthrough. 1 week later, forensic analysis confirmed that the ring was indeed Melissa's. The diamonds matched a custom setting Daniel had personally designed, and the gold band was consistent with a unique engraving only Melissa had ever worn. This, in itself, wasn't a surprise. What was shocking was the discovery that the ring had been cleaned recently, too recently. The police had noticed a faint trace of a cleaning solution on its surface, a chemical residue that had only been released in recent years. Detective Grant held a meeting with the local FBI agent assigned to the case, Michael Dawson. Together, they pored over the facts and their growing pile of evidence. Agent Dawson, who had worked countless cold cases, looked at the data, then at Grant. This ring didn't just come from nowhere. It's almost like someone is trying to tell us something. But who? Grant asked, frowning. Who would have had it for all these years? Daniel searched for answers. Unable to wait any longer, Daniel began his own search. The idea of waiting for the police to piece everything together seemed unbearable. He reached out to the gas station owners, who had long since moved out of state. But the building had changed ownership multiple times, and no one had worked there in 1999 who could recall anything unusual. Then Daniel turned to an unexpected source, the original surveillance footage. Though the images were grainy and old, they might still hold something. What he found would haunt him. The footage from 1999 showed Melissa walking toward the vending machine after she had purchased her water and gum. But there, for a brief moment, before she disappeared, another figure could be seen in the background, a shadow hidden just outside the frame. It was a fleeting image, but enough to make Daniel's stomach turn. The shadow was unmistakable. It wasn't the clerk, Royce, it wasn't anyone from the station, and it wasn't someone he recognized. But the shadow was there, watching. The possibility of a witness. Daniel contacted the station clerk, Royce, now retired, hoping he could provide some clarity. Royce had seen hundreds of faces come and go during his years at the station. He'd been there when Melissa had visited. When Daniel showed him the grainy footage, Royce stared at it for a long time. He didn't speak. His eyes narrowed. "I remember her," Royce finally said, almost to himself. "But I don't remember him." "Who?" Daniel asked, his heart racing. Royce's voice dropped. "There was a man, a customer. I remember he came in right before she left. He was quiet, didn't say much, just stood in the corner. He didn't seem right. He was wearing a baseball cap, like he was trying to hide. And his eyes, there was something about his eyes, something cold." Daniel's breath hitched. A man who had been there, watching. The shadow in the video, the ring, the cold man with the cold eyes. It was all starting to fit together in a way Daniel never could have anticipated. And yet, there were more questions than answers. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. The blurry image from the old gas station footage looped in his mind. Melissa walking back toward her car, unaware that someone, just out of frame, was watching. And now, 20 years later, Melissa's wedding ring had resurfaced. Not buried, not found in some evidence locker, but left, placed, even, like a message in the coin return slot of a vending machine that didn't even exist when she disappeared. That wasn't coincidence. That was intention. Detective Sarah Grant had been poring through old files for a week. She'd read every interview, every lead, every dead-end report from the 1999 investigation. Most of the original detectives were retired now, and back then the case was quickly overshadowed by more urgent disappearances. Cases with suspects, trails, or clear motive. Melissa's had none of those. Grant reached out to the original lead investigator, now 68 and living in Florida. He remembered Melissa Cooper's case well. "She was the one who vanished from that gas station," he said over the phone. "Pretty girl, newlywed, quiet file. There wasn't much to go on." "But do you remember anyone mentioning a man in a baseball cap?" Grant asked. "Someone who might have been lingering near the store around the time she disappeared?" There was a pause. "I think I do," he finally said. "But we couldn't verify it. The store clerk mentioned him, said he gave off a strange vibe, but there was no license plate, no name, no interaction. He paid in cash. We couldn't make him anything more than a ghost." A ghost. That's what this man had been, back then, and maybe still was. Daniel wasn't waiting around anymore. He spent the next 3 days driving to every store, pawn shop, and jewelry repair location within a 100-mile radius of Monteagle. His reasoning was simple. Someone cleaned the ring. Someone, somewhere, recently handled it. At a small family-run jeweler in Murfreesboro, Daniel found something that made his blood run cold. He walked in with a printed photo of the ring and asked the elderly man at the counter, "Have you ever cleaned or seen this ring?" The jeweler squinted, then asked for a closer look. "I don't keep records unless there's an engraving," he said. "But yeah, that looks familiar. A guy brought one in just last month. Real quiet type. Didn't say much. Kept looking at the door like he was nervous. Paid cash. I remember the inscription inside the band, MC, right? Right? That's how I remember it. I thought it was for his wife or something." Daniel's voice cracked. "Can you describe him?" The jeweler frowned, thinking. "White guy, mid-40s maybe, average build, had a beard, gray in it. He wore a cap, I think. Sunglasses, real twitchy. Baseball cap, same as the man from the tape, still hiding his face." "Do you have a security camera?" Daniel asked. The jeweler shook his head. "Sorry, never installed one. We don't get much trouble here." But trouble had passed through, and now Daniel knew that Melissa's ring had been in someone's possession until just weeks ago. That meant she hadn't simply dropped it. It hadn't been stolen and lost. It had been kept, preserved, by someone for 20 years, someone who finally decided to let it go. Back at the police station, Grant added this new clue to her timeline. The vending machine where the ring was found had been installed in 2014. Between then and now, dozens of people had likely used it. So why did the ring only appear now? It didn't make sense, unless someone had held on to it, then deliberately placed it there. "Almost like he wanted it to be found," she muttered. But why now? A new thread emerges. Grant submitted the ring for a second round of analysis, this time looking for trace DNA, sweat, skin cells, anything that might have been left behind when it was cleaned or handled. Results would take time. She turned instead to a background check on unsolved disappearances along the I-24 corridor in the late 90s and early 2000s. One case stood out. June 98, a woman named Claire Redmond, 31, disappeared after stopping at a rest stop 40 miles east of where Melissa vanished. Like Melissa, she was alone. Like Melissa, there was no struggle. Her car was found abandoned, her purse intact, no sign of a robbery, just vanished. That case was also cold. No leads, no body, no witness. Grant cross-referenced the dates, the geography, and the case files. There were similarities in both women's appearance. Slim build, shoulder-length dark hair, light eyes. Both traveling alone. Both vanished near rest stops. Both vanished in summer to fall shoulder seasons when travel along rural Tennessee roads spiked. It was circumstantial, yes, but chillingly similar. She marked it on her board, then added another pin. August 2001, woman missing in Kentucky. Then another, May 2003, Illinois. All in a triangle. A pattern was starting to form. Daniel's breakdown. Meanwhile, Daniel was unraveling. 20 years of pain had hardened him, but now he felt unsteady again. The questions that had once haunted him were no longer just emotional. Now they were tangible. Someone had Melissa's ring. Someone chose to place it in that machine. Someone might still be out there. He kept thinking, was she alive all these years? Or had someone been holding a piece of her, just a piece, as a trophy? His hands shook as he stared at the ring again, now sealed in an evidence bag on his kitchen table. His wedding ring was still on his finger. He never took it off. He never would. The anonymous envelope. On the morning of October 14th, 2019, just 2 weeks after the ring was found, Detective Grant received a plain envelope at the precinct. No return address, no stamp, just hand-delivered to the front desk. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a wooded area, dense trees, overgrown brush. In the corner, the rusted edge of what looked like an abandoned structure. Scribbled on the back in shaky handwriting, "This is where she sleeps. 20 years is enough." Grant froze. She immediately scanned the image into her system and sent it to analysts. Meanwhile, she began comparing it to aerial maps of forested zones near Monteagle and adjacent counties. Daniel was called in. When he saw the photo, he didn't speak. He just stared, heart pounding. Because he recognized something in the brush, something most people wouldn't see. A piece of blue, old, faded paint paint the same color as Melissa's Corolla. Someone was cracking, and the silence of 20 years was beginning to fracture. The moment Daniel saw the photograph, he knew. It wasn't just a random patch of woods. It was a place burned into his memory, not because he had ever been there, but because it had haunted his dreams. For years he imagined Melissa calling out from somewhere deep in the trees, lost and waiting to be found. Now that imagined place had become real. And worse, someone wanted it found. Detective Sarah Grant drove to the location with a search team and Daniel in tow. They used satellite imagery to narrow down the terrain, and within 24 hours, they identified the approximate area in Grundy County, Tennessee, about 30 miles from the gas station where Melissa vanished. It was a stretch of forest bordering an abandoned campground, long overgrown and forgotten. The area matched the photo perfectly: twisted pines, the rusted edge of an old structure, and faint traces of blue among the brush. As they arrived, Daniel stood motionless at the edge of the clearing. A strange sensation filled him: dread, certainty, and a strange kind of grief he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "We start here," Grant instructed the search team. They began slowly, cautiously, combing the area with cadaver dogs, metal detectors, and ground-penetrating radar. Hours passed. Then one of the dogs stopped, barked, and refused to move. The team began to dig. The discovery. At a depth of just over 3 feet, they found what was left of a shallow grave, a few shattered remnants of bone, scattered cloth fibers, and, shockingly, a rusted car part embedded in the soil. A VINE number on the fragment was still legible. When it was cross-referenced, it matched Melissa's 1999 Toyota Corolla. Grant knelt beside the site, hands on her knees, trying to steady herself. The bones were sent for forensic examination. DNA testing would take time, but no one had any doubt. It was Melissa. Daniel stared silently as the earth gave up its truth. His wife hadn't run away. She hadn't disappeared into thin air. She had been murdered and buried, like trash, by someone who had watched her, stalked her, and then erased her from the world, the trophy keeper. The evidence pointed to something even darker than Daniel had ever feared. The ring hadn't been lost. It had been kept. And now someone, for reasons unknown, had decided to place it in public view, to taunt the memory of her, or to confess, or maybe both. Agent Dawson, now fully embedded in the investigation, studied the envelope again. "No fingerprints, no DNA, no trace on the paper," he said. "Whoever sent this is careful, very careful, but also slipping." "What makes you say that?" Grant asked. "Because they want to be seen. They're not hiding this anymore." A pattern in shadows. Grant continued reviewing the other disappearances along I-24. The similarities weren't just coincidence anymore. They were pattern. Nearly every woman was in her late 20s to early 30s. All vanished from isolated areas. All were alone, and in most cases nothing was taken. Not wallets, not keys, not jewelry. Except one item. In each file, there was always one thing missing: a personal token, a necklace, a bracelet, a ring. Each victim had something small and sentimental that was never recovered, just like Melissa's ring. "This isn't just murder," Grant said, pinning the last photo to the board. "It's collection." A fractured mind. Daniel sat alone that night in Melissa's old chair, staring out the window. The grief, so long dormant, now surged forward with a force that hollowed him out. For 20 years, he had imagined every possibility: that she was alive, that she had run, that she had been taken, but might one day come back. Now he knew. And strangely, that certainty brought its own kind of madness, because someone had held on to her memory, not with love, but with control. The DNA match. 3 days later, the lab called. The remains were confirmed to be Melissa Cooper. A bone fragment yielded a clean mitochondrial DNA match to her mother, who had passed 5 years earlier, but had left a sample on file during the original missing persons case. Daniel wept, not out of shock, but out of the unbearable weight of finality. He would never see her again. But now she could be buried properly, the coin slot connection. Then came an unexpected break. Grant had the vending machine itself sent to the lab for full disassembly. Beneath the coin return mechanism, lodged deep in the machinery, was a sliver of cloth. It was pink, faded, stained, a fragment of fabric. The same fabric type and pattern as the blouse Melissa was wearing when she vanished, confirmed by old photographs taken days before her trip. The location of the fabric was impossible to explain logically. The vending machine was manufactured in 2014, installed in 2015. No one could have dropped something behind the coin slot accidentally, not without dismantling the entire machine. Whoever placed the ring had done it carefully, deliberately, and left a piece of her clothing behind, like a signature. A name. Surfaces? Grant pushed deeper into background checks. While digging into maintenance records for the vending machines, she found that the machine's installation and periodic repairs were outsourced to a small subcontractor in 2016, Fowler Rest Stop Services, based in Western Tennessee. Only 3 employees had worked there at the time. One of them stood out. Raymond Bell, age 46, worked maintenance routes near Monteagle for 2 years before quietly quitting in 2018. His file was thin. No arrests, no complaints. Quiet man, lived alone, former trucker, but his route had put him near 5 of the known disappearance sites, including Claire Redmond's in 1998 and Melissa Cooper's gas station in 1999. Worse, his last listed address, 2 miles from the wooded site where Melissa's remains were found. The noose tightens, the FBI issued a quiet subpoena. Surveillance was ordered. Bell, now living under a different name, R.D. Bellamy, was found residing in a remote trailer in Coffee County. He worked nights. He kept to himself. And behind his home, partially obscured by overgrowth, was a locked shed. Grant and Dawson secured a search warrant. Inside the shed, they found it. A box, weathered, carefully sealed. Inside were 6 items: a charm bracelet, a locket, a pair of earrings, a keychain, a folded photograph, and the receipt from the jewelry shop where Melissa's ring had been cleaned. Each item belonged to a missing woman, a collection of trophies. And the photo? Melissa, standing at the gas station, taken from a distance. The date stamp read August 22nd, 1999, the day she vanished. The shed behind Raymond Bell's trailer was a tomb of memories, each object inside a piece of someone lost, a memento of a life silenced. The agents moved slowly, cataloging the evidence with careful hands. No one spoke much, except to identify and tag each item. A quiet horror settled over the scene. Daniel Cooper stood just outside the yellow tape, fists clenched on his sides. He wasn't supposed to be there, but Detective Grant had called him anyway. "You needed to see it," she'd said, and now he did. Melissa's ring had been in that box, touched, cleaned, preserved, for years. Daniel stared at the small photograph that had been tucked into the bottom. It showed Melissa looking off into the distance, her expression unreadable. She had no idea someone was watching her from a car or behind a pump. He imagined her last moments, how terrified she must have been, how alone. The arrest Raymond Bell, alias R.D. Bellamy, was arrested at 6:12 a.m. on October 19th, 2019. He didn't resist, didn't ask why. He just looked at the officers and said softly, "I was wondering when you'd come." Grant and Dawson questioned him for hours. For the first 2 days, he didn't say a word. Then on day 3, he requested a tape recorder and a legal pad. He began to write. The tapes. What emerged from Bell's taped confession was more disturbing than anything the investigators had imagined. "I never touched them out of lust," he said in a cold, even voice. "It wasn't like that." He spoke of his collection as though it were something holy. "Some people collect stamps, some keep bird feathers. I kept moments, memories. People never really go away, you know. Not if you keep a piece of them." He described the women in abstract terms. Fragile, too trusting, meant to be saved in time. Melissa, he said, was different. She was the most beautiful one, not just her looks, her sadness, I saw her alone at the pump. There was something in her eyes, like she already knew the world wasn't fair. I thought she wouldn't scream, but she did. He hit her, hard, then drove her into the woods. He kept her for 2 days. She cried at first, then she just stared at me, like she didn't care if she lived or died. He never described killing her. He just said, eventually she was quiet, and I buried her where the moss was soft. The ring's journey. When asked about the ring, Bell said it started to feel heavy. He kept it in a box for nearly 2 decades. Sometimes he'd hold it and imagine her voice. Sometimes he'd dream about her sitting in that chair in the shed, talking softly, always asking, why me? One night, something in him cracked. He drove to the gas station and waited until it was quiet, slipped the ring into the coin return slot, placed a scrap of her blouse inside the machine. I wanted her to go home, he said. The fallout. The news exploded across Tennessee and beyond. A man who had stalked and murdered at least 6 women along the I-24 corridor was finally in custody. The press dubbed him the Collector. Other families came forward, mothers, sisters, husbands, each now wondering if their missing loved one might also be among Bell's trophies. The FBI launched a full-scale operation to cross-reference unsolved cases with Bell's known routes and history. Grant worked 18-hour days, processing leads. Daniel helped identify the charm bracelet in the evidence box. It belonged to Claire Redmond, missing since 1998. Her family finally had closure. Melissa's funeral. On November 10, 2019, Melissa Cooper was finally laid to rest. The ceremony was small. Daniel gave the eulogy. His voice cracked halfway through. She wasn't just a victim. She was a woman with plans, a wife, a daughter. She loved rainstorms and fresh coffee and old books. She was kind, even when the world wasn't. He laid the ring, cleaned, now evidence no longer, on top of her casket before it was lowered. He didn't want to keep it. It wasn't a symbol of love anymore. It was a witness, the aftermath. Raymond Bell was indicted on 6 counts of murder, though the FBI believed he may be responsible for more. Investigators discovered journals in his home, cryptic, rambling entries that hinted at other victims across state lines. A multi-agency task force was formed to track and confirm these possible cases. Meanwhile, Detective Grant was promoted to special investigator for cold cases across the Southeast. She kept Melissa's case file on her desk, always open, always close. It reminded her that even in the darkest stories, sometimes the truth does come back, even if it takes 20 years. Daniel's letter. 2 months after the funeral, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Then he began to write. Melissa, I never stopped loving you. I never stopped looking. I used to think not knowing was the worst kind of grief, but now I know that silence isn't worse than knowing you suffered. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry it took so long, but I promise, your story will never be forgotten. You're free now, and so am I. He folded the letter and placed it inside a wooden box filled with photos and memories. Then he stood, walked outside, and watched the sunrise. The world had changed, but so had he. The days following Raymond Bell's arrest blurred into a storm of legal motions, media coverage, and deepening investigation. What had started as a missing person case 2 decades ago had become a national reckoning. Not just for Melissa Cooper's family, but for the families of every woman who'd vanished along that long, lonely stretch of I-24. But while most of the country moved on to the next headline, those closest to the case were pulled deeper into a chilling web that Bell's confession only partially revealed. Because now came the question no one wanted to answer. Was there someone else? The unearthed ledger. In a second search of Bell's trailer, forensic investigators discovered something they had missed the first time. A rusted metal lockbox hidden beneath floorboards in the bathroom. Inside, there were dozens of pages torn from various notebooks, all stuffed together with no order. The papers were smeared with grease and faded with age. But one thing was clear: dates, times, locations, and initials. Some pages bore shorthand notes like 7399 MC, satisfied, 11400 TK, too loud, left early, 61002 CS, kept locket. There were at least 15 entries. Only 6 victims had ever been linked to Bell. Who were the others? Had they escaped? Had their bodies never been found? Were they still out there? The woman who got away. Agent Dawson began contacting families of women who had gone missing near the locations and dates in Bell's ledger. Some were dead ends, some were heartbreaking confirmations of long-lost cases. But one call, made late on a rainy Thursday evening, changed everything. A woman named Teresa Kimball, now 44, living quietly in rural Alabama, answered the phone. When Dawson introduced himself, she paused, then said, "Is this about the man with the ring box?" Stunned, Dawson pressed further. Teresa recounted a story she had never told anyone, not even her husband. Teresa's story. In 2000, Teresa had been driving through Tennessee on her way to visit her sister in Kentucky. She stopped at a rest area outside Jasper to use the restroom. It was late, past midnight. She remembered the light above the vending machine was flickering. As she walked back to her car, a man approached, clean-shaven, soft-spoken. He told her he worked for the highway maintenance crew and asked if she had seen a dropped ring near the machines. "I felt something was wrong," she said, "but he was polite. He didn't touch me." He asked her to check the coin slot, said maybe it had slipped inside. She stepped back instead and said she was in a hurry. "I remember the look on his face, like something broke in his head. But he didn't follow me. He just smiled and walked away." She never reported it. She thought maybe she'd imagined the danger. Now she knew better. The 7th victim. After Teresa came forward, attention turned to the other initials in Bell's ledger. One entry stood out. EM 91203 said she was late. Took her anyway. Using only those initials and the date, Detective Grant cross-referenced active missing persons cases from that period. Within hours, she found her. Emily Mason, 32, disappeared on a Friday night in 2003 after calling her husband to say she was running late. Her last known location? A rest stop in Coffee County. Her case had gone cold nearly 2 decades ago. No sign of her, no leads. Grant pulled the file and felt a sick twist in her gut. Emily had worn a necklace engraved with her daughter's name, Megan. It was never recovered. Back in evidence, they pulled the necklace found in Bell's shed. On the back, in tiny faded script, Megan. Confirmed. The trial looms. By early 2020, Raymond Bell faced 7 counts of first-degree murder, plus numerous additional charges. Prosecutors were preparing to seek life without parole. Bell's defense attorney claimed mental instability, painting Bell as a man damaged by childhood trauma and isolation. But the methodical nature of his crimes, the trophies, the hiding places, the photographs, all suggested cold calculation. Daniel Cooper attended every pre-trial hearing. He didn't speak to Bell. He didn't need to. Once, their eyes met. Bell smiled. Daniel didn't blink. A message from the grave. In late January, as prosecutors built their case, a technician restoring data from Bell's old hard drives found something unexpected. A video file. It was old, corrupted, and silent. But after hours of restoration, the footage became clear. Melissa. Sitting in the wooden chair inside Bell's shed, her face bruised, her hands tied in front of her. The video lasted 26 seconds. She looked directly at the camera and whispered something. There was no sound, but a forensic lip reader was brought in. After days of analysis, they revealed what she had said. "My name is Melissa Cooper. I am not afraid of you." It broke everyone in the room. Daniel's decision. Daniel requested a copy of the footage. He watched it once, then again, and again, until he felt the meaning behind her words settle in his chest like a living fire. She had been brave. She had faced death and chosen defiance. He could do no less. The collector's fate. On February 24th, 2020, Raymond Bell accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The judge called him a predator who hid behind politeness and preyed on the isolated. Bell showed no emotion as the sentence was read, but as he was escorted out of the courtroom, he turned back and said, "There are more." Raymond Bell's final words, "There are more," echoed like a curse in the courtroom. Detective Grant didn't sleep that night. The words weren't just a final taunt. They were a challenge. A door left open to more horror, more heartbreak, but maybe also more truth. If there were more, where were they? And why had he never written them down? The unmatched trophies. Back in evidence, a new team was assigned to reinvestigate all of Bell's possessions. Over 200 items had been recovered from his shed, his trailer, and a storage unit rented under an alias. Some were easily matched to confirmed victims. Others, however, were complete mysteries. A child's pink shoelace, a charm shaped like a violin, a broken key with a motel tag, a photo of a woman standing on a bridge, her name still unknown. Agent Dawson pulled the photos out and laid them side by side with the known victims. There were at least 4 items that didn't connect to any case. And Bell wasn't talking anymore. The bridge woman. One item in particular drew Grant's attention. The photo of the woman on the bridge. It wasn't taken secretly. She was looking at the camera, smiling faintly. Not posed, but aware. Grant sent the image out across state and national databases. Facial recognition pinged a possible match. Delilah Reyes, last seen in 2001 near Chattanooga. Her missing persons report was vague. She had no family, just a friend who said she had gone to meet someone from a classifieds ad. At the time, police assumed she left voluntarily. Grant now believed otherwise. A survivor's silence. Meanwhile, word of Bell's conviction spread quietly through survivor networks. Women who had escaped violent encounters but never reported them, too afraid of being disbelieved. One woman, calling herself Marie, sent an anonymous letter to the Cold Case Division. In careful block letters she wrote, "He took me in 1996. I got away after 3 days. I never told anyone. But I remember the shed. I remember the smell. And I remember a woman chained to the wall. She didn't speak. She just hummed. Over and over. I think her name was Ava. Please find her." The letter had no return address, no name. But it gave them a new clue. Ava. The Whisper Network. With each new lead, Grant pushed harder. She created a task force specifically dedicated to identifying the unknown victims and survivors possibly tied to Bell. The effort was called Project Ava. Tips trickled in. Some were false, but some, like one from a former nurse at a rural psychiatric facility, cracked something open. In 2002, we admitted a young woman found wandering near the Cumberland Plateau. No ID, wouldn't speak. She had ligature scars on her wrists. She hummed constantly. Same tune. We called her Jane Doe, 23. She's still here. Grant drove out the next day. Jane Doe, 23. The woman sat in a chair by the window. She looked much younger than her age, frozen in time, somehow untouched by the world outside. She didn't speak when Grant entered, but she hummed, soft, low, and rhythmic. Grant recognized it. It was the same tune Melissa Cooper had been singing in her wedding video, the last video taken of her before her disappearance. A connection, a witness, possibly a name. Breaking the silence. With the help of trauma specialists and gentle interviews, Jane Doe, 23, began to speak, in fragments, in whispers. She remembered a man who offered her a ride, a smell of metal and gasoline, a woman chained across from her who mouthed the word breathe. She remembered her name, Ava Sinclair, reported missing in 2002, assumed dead. She was alive. The full count. With Ava's account, The FBI now had direct evidence of at least 9 victims, 7 confirmed dead, 2 survivors. But the photos, the objects, the items in the metal box suggested the number was even higher, possibly 12, maybe more. Bell remained silent in prison. He had stopped answering questions, stopped writing. But then one final envelope arrived at Detective Grant's office. No return address. Inside was a small photograph, grainy and torn, a woman with curly hair standing beside a vending machine. On the back, a note in Bell's unmistakable handwriting. Not all of them were mine. A second predator? The implication was sickening. For 20 years, investigators believed they had found their serial killer. And they had. But this? This hinted at something worse. Someone else. A copycat? An accomplice? A silent partner? Had Bell inspired others? Or had he just taken credit for crimes that were never his? Daniel's resolve. When Daniel Cooper saw the photo, his body tensed. It wasn't Melissa, but it could have been. Same age, same place, same trap. He asked Grant a question she couldn't answer yet. What if he didn't work alone? Because if that were true, then Melissa's story wasn't over. It was just the beginning of something much darker. The idea of a second predator had seemed like fiction. The kind of twist that belonged in a novel, not in a real-world horror that had already claimed too much. But Bell's handwritten note, not all of them were mine, couldn't be ignored. Detective Grant stared at the photograph that came with it. The woman's face wasn't familiar. The vending machine looked newer. The timestamp on the back, barely legible. October 2018. Bell had already been off the grid for years by then, living quietly in a trailer, rarely seen, never traveling far. He couldn't have taken that photo. Someone else had. The gas station manager, Grant and Dawson, visited the station once again. The staff had changed since the ring was found, but the current manager, Anita Brooks, had been working there part-time since 2017. When shown the photo, she froze. That woman came in once, alone, real quiet. She bought a soda and some chips, and then stood by the vending machines for a long time. Anita didn't remember the exact date, but she remembered something else. There was a man in a tan pickup, watching her. I thought it was her husband, but when she drove off, he followed her. That detail wasn't in any of Bell's patterns. He never followed. He waited. The pickup truck security footage from that day had long since been erased, but the State Highway Department had camera logs for the nearby stretch of road. Working with the Department of Transportation, Grant pulled every frame from that week. And there it was, a tan 1990s Chevrolet pickup, blurry plates, a dark decal on the rear window, and a driver wearing a cap, looking straight ahead, as if he knew he was being recorded. Facial recognition gave them nothing. The truck was too common, the plate unreadable. But Grant's instincts screamed, this man knew Raymond Bell. Bell speaks again. After weeks of silence, Bell requested a meeting. His lawyer objected, but Bell insisted. Grant and Dawson met him in a sterile interview room at Riverbend Maximum Security. Bell looked thinner, older, but his eyes, cold, amused, hadn't changed. Got your letter, Grant said, placing the photo on the table. Bell looked at it, expression unreadable. She was mine once, he said softly, but I let her go. Grant leaned forward. Who's the man in the truck? Bell smiled. You'll have to figure that out. He liked to watch more than act, until he didn't. Name? Bell shook his head. He called himself Wade, never told me his last. We met online, back in the forums. Dawson tensed. What forums? Bell's eyes gleamed. Mors vincit omnia, Latin. Death conquers all. We shared philosophies. He always said I moved too fast. He liked the wait. The dark web. The FBI Cybercrimes Division began tracing the digital footprints Bell had left behind. Obsolete forums, encrypted archives, password-protected chat rooms long since abandoned, but one thread remained active. An anonymous user named Wade32 had posted just 3 weeks prior. The post was chilling in its simplicity. Some collections don't end with the collector, some are meant to be continued. Attached was an image, a coin return slot. Empty. But in the shadow of the slot, just barely visible, the edge of another ring. Melissa's ring wasn't the last. Grant felt the weight of it settle over her like cold steel. Bell hadn't left a legacy. He'd left a blueprint. Wade wasn't just a fan, he was a student. And now the teacher was gone, but the ritual, the hunting, the watching, the collecting, was evolving. A disturbing parallel. Across the country, law enforcement agencies began re-examining unsolved missing persons cases from the past 5 years. A disturbing pattern emerged. A woman vanished outside a truck stop in Arkansas. Another from a rest area in Georgia. One more from a state highway in Kentucky. Each time, no struggle, no witnesses, vehicle left behind. Each time, a vending machine nearby. And in 2 of the cases, now reopened, an old coin had been found lodged in the return slot. Not currency, a token, each one engraved with a Latin phrase, Mors vincit omnia. The ring's twin Daniel Cooper was called back in when a second ring was recovered, this time in Ohio, found by a janitor cleaning an out-of-service vending machine along I-75. It was a replica of Melissa's, same design, same initials, but not hers. Inside, instead of MC 61299, it read, CR 30418 Claire Redmond, the name of one of Bell's confirmed victims. But Claire had never worn a ring. This wasn't hers. It was a message. Someone was recreating the past and leaving symbols like breadcrumbs. The chilling realization. Back at her desk, Grant assembled the timeline. Bell's crimes, 1997-2004. Silence for over a decade. Ring found, 2019. Copycat postings, 2020. Present. 2 rings, 3 missing women, 1 truck, 1 name, Wade. It was now more than a cold case. It was a manhunt. And unlike Bell, Wade wasn't hiding in plain sight. He was hiding in someone else's story. Possibly even Melissa's. The next victim. On June 9, 2020, a call came in from a gas station employee just outside Nashville. A woman had gone missing. Her car was still at the pump, keys in the ignition. No sign of struggle. Inside the coin return, a third ring, blank, no engraving, just an open space, as if waiting for a name. The third ring was unlike the others. No initials, no date, just the cold, unfinished surface of white gold, a void waiting to be filled. And to Detective Grant, it felt like a countdown, a message, and maybe a promise. Back to the beginning. They revisited everything, Melissa Cooper's disappearance, the timeline, the location, the fact that 20 years later her wedding ring had been found in the coin return of a vending machine that hadn't even been installed when she vanished. That meant one of 2 things. 1, someone had kept her ring for nearly 2 decades, then placed it there. 2, or, more chilling, Melissa had placed it there herself. If she had, then Melissa Cooper had been alive, possibly for years, after the world had declared her dead. And whoever Wade was, he might have been the one holding her captive. The vending route agent Dawson dug into the vending machine records. The unit where Melissa's ring was found had been installed in 2014, leased by a small third-party company in Tennessee. Route managers, refill contractors, maintenance logs, all were reviewed. One name stood out. Eli Wade Carver, route technician, part-time, worked the Middle Tennessee corridor from 2014 to 2018. He left the company after an injury. No forwarding address, no social media, no credit history after 2019. And yet, his initials matched. Wade. The cabin. They traced a P.O. box used on his W-9 form to a parcel of land near the Tennessee-Alabama border, registered to a deceased aunt, remote, no cell service, no utilities. But there was an old well, a shack used for hunting, and half-collapsed fencing, overgrown and half-forgotten. But the shed? That was new. Metal door, reinforced frame. FBI agents surrounded it at dawn. Inside, they found chains, a cot, a space heater, and 7 blank tags nailed into the wooden wall, each marked with nothing but a number. 1 through 6 had an X scratched through them. 7 was blank. The video. In a padlocked drawer, agents discovered an old camcorder and a box of mini-DV tapes. One was labeled MC, Songs 2002-2009. They watched in silence. Melissa, bound, thin, silent, not crying, not screaming, just waiting, and humming. The same song from her wedding day, the same song Ava had hummed for years. Grant's hands shook as she fast-forwarded. The footage spanned months, years. At one point, Melissa looked straight into the camera and whispered, "If someone finds this, I forgive you, but please don't let him do this to anyone else." That was the last footage. No recording of her death, no proof she ever escaped. Only her voice, now speaking from the void, confronting Bell. They showed Bell the footage. He watched, stone-faced. And then he laughed. "You never looked where you should have," he said. "That man, Wade, he worshipped pain like scripture. I just liked control. He believed in it." "Believed in what?" Grant asked. Bell leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Resurrection, a pattern of return." Each ring was a resurrection, a memory pulled from the grave, a symbol meant to say, "I can bring them back," or erase them forever. Wade hadn't just copied Bell. He'd expanded him, turned his legacy into a twisted religion. Each ring, each coin slot, each woman, part of a dark ritual of ownership and silence. The final name DNA confirmed what they feared. Bone fragments buried in a crawl space beneath the cabin belonged to Melissa Cooper. She hadn't died in 1999. She died sometime around 2009, 10 years after she vanished. 10 years in captivity, and all that time, no one knew. No one came, except Wade. The arrest. Eli Wade Carver was found 2 weeks later in a rundown motel outside Birmingham. He went quietly, said nothing, just smiled when they cuffed him. In his bag, a new ring box, empty, no initials, no date, just the echo of what he intended to do next. Daniel's goodbye. Daniel Cooper stood at the cemetery once more, 21 years after Melissa had gone missing. This time, her real headstone stood beside her father's. He placed her wedding photo at its base. "She never stopped loving you," Grant said beside him. Daniel nodded. His voice broke. "I just wish I could have helped her." "You did," she whispered. "You never stopped looking." Epilogue. Legacy. Melissa's story became a watershed moment. Victim support groups were expanded. FBI protocols on missing adults were rewritten. Project AVA identified 3 more survivors who had escaped similar predators. And Melissa's video, her last words, were released with her family's blessing. The message reached millions. "If someone finds this, I forgive you, but please don't let him do this to anyone else."